Dog and Pony Show. The purpose of this is for you guys to have the conversation about what next level security compliance looks like for your MSP, because we're all aware that whether it's CMMC or NIST or HIPAA or whatever, there's an increasing requirement for actual legitimate compliance from MSPs, which until now, and probably still is, but we're hoping to see an end of the wild, wild west industry and some evolution into something that is more regulated, which will be good for those of us who get our act together and bad for the guy who is swiping a credit card at the pay-per client or pay-per technician product and running his MSP out of his mother's basement. So in an effort to separate the men from the boys, and Brian, I'll throw this over to you. You and I talked the other day about kind of the difference between, the MSP and the MSSP, and then that InfoSec, security consultant, that guy, and then the third-party auditor that's required by a regulatory component. And do you want to talk about kind of, we've got a lot of MSPs on the phone here. Does anybody here identify as an MSSP as part of their product offering? Rafi kinda. Philippe does. Okay, so we've got some of both of those folks in the house. Let's start with kind of what separates you from those, and how you like to partner and work with them, but also what separates you from that regulatory and governing compliance auditor who also kind of comes in the picture.
Yeah, thanks, Alex, and welcome everybody. Nice to see the faces, and looks like everybody has almost made it to the finish line on 2020, which I know has been a challenge, but everybody looks pretty healthy and doing okay, so that's good news. So like Alex said, you've probably been aware, and I used to have an MSP, right? I've built and sold, exited several over the years. I sold my last one in early 2017 and started up this business to fill that gap. That's that information security gap. And when you talk about compliance, especially cascading compliance, because I know we all have a lot of customers perhaps that have been in largely historically unregulated businesses, right? They are not in healthcare necessarily, or they're not in financial services, so they haven't had a lot of regulations. But now what's happening is, in order for them to sell their product or service, they're getting these questionnaires, or they're getting a number of cascading compliance demands, especially around SOC 2 Type 2 or ISO or something along those lines. So what happens in that scenario is kind of like Alex was just talking about. There's this fly ball to the outfield, and the customer looks at the MSP, and the MSP looks at the customer, and then there's this MSSP character that has to get involved with continuous monitoring and some other things when you talk about compliance. And what we've found, that the missing part is this weird thing about, I have to have policies and I have to have a formal program and procedures, or they think that the customers think that they have policies because they downloaded them off of SANS and did a find and replace with their name on it and put them on a shelf and called it good. And so now what's happening, especially with Sunburst and everything going on with SolarWinds, I've seen a number of requests now where people want to know, what are you doing to make sure that you're not creating backdoors or putting backdoors into our environment? And you're seeing this elevated and increased awareness around, hey, if you're vulnerable, then so am I. So you're seeing a lot of this added due diligence. And I don't like to use the word compliance, but that's the one where the word audit and compliance, you're seeing that a lot. Your customers are seeing that. And MSPs are in that bouncing ball, that data flow diagram, and people that have privileged access and the keys to the kingdom. MSPs are consistently falling into that area of, hey, you're a critical part of access and how our controls are implemented and how we can prove our controls are working. And so, just like Alex said, the gap that we feel is more of coming into those when a end user gets a cascading compliance demand, especially around SOC 2 pressure, or they get these gigantic security questionnaires. Hey, the MSP does it, right? If it plugs into a wall, I'm going to call my MSP. and I'm going to have them take care of it. And oh, this security questionnaire, it looks like something that I just expect my MSP to just do and handle, or all these things that I'm being requested or required to respond to, my MSP handles it. And then you get involved, and it's like, well, yeah, we take care of some of these things, but we don't really do formal information security programs. And yeah, we sell some disaster recovery and endpoint protection and things like Dado, and we have our PSA and our RMM installed, and we're doing those things, but there's this missing part that the client just kind of doesn't know what to do with. And oftentimes they need a partner to help do that. So I don't know, I'll open it up. Like Alex said, last thing we want to do is throw a 300-page deck at you and talk about how great we are. Nobody cares. I think the real element here is I'd like to get some feedback and understanding. What are you guys seeing as boots on the ground with your customers, especially around security questionnaires or compliance demands on
Or
them? And
pop-up questions right now around SolarWinds and things like that. Are you guys getting that kind of stuff at this point?
For us, one thing that I've been working with on my clients is going through their cyber liability policies and making sure that they know what their risks are if there are holes in their policies. So I've been working with insurance agents on one side, clients on the other, and then it's been helpful because then it's not only me saying you need to turn on two-factor or we need to do phishing training. It's this question is asking yes or no, and it could actually save you money on your rates for cyber liability insurance if you follow through. So that's been kind of the boots on the ground, is having those continuous discussions with my clients in that regard, specifically with insurance.
yeah, Kirk, the cyber liability or cyber risk policies, that's kind of the first exposure a lot of organizations had a few years ago, where they start getting some questionnaires, right? They get some of these questions, and going back a few years, and we've all been in this boat. When we're answering those questions, we're doing things in some cases that are aspirational, or we're answering these questions in a way that are hopefully going to reduce our rates. And oftentimes, and there's enough actuarial data out now that says, hey, because in large part, insurance companies haven't paid a lot of attention until the last year or so with cyber threats. They understand floods and earthquakes and those kind of natural disasters, but with cyber, what they're doing is they're starting to build in a lot of exclusions around the things that are really most likely to occur. In fact, almost all the policies I've reviewed in the last, I'll say, couple of years have pretty strong exclusions around social engineering. And we all know that a lot of the bad things that happen to our clients is email. Social engineering is oftentimes the vehicle. And so if the insurance company, if there's a claim and then they come back, they're going to pull out this evidence, artifacts, which the questionnaire and how you responded is one of those. And they're going to start asking some questions. And then what they're going to do is, oftentimes, and we see this a lot, they insert their forensic people who are commissioned and paid for by the insurance company to prove and limit the liability of the insurance company, but to prove it meets one of the exclusions, so they can limit the pay or limit the claim.
So
And that's a big
specifically on
deal.
something like social engineering. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, what's that,
Um,
Alex?
well, specifically on something like social engineering, um, you and I talked the other day about the MSP answer to a lot of the stuff is, well, I'll just buy a product and throw it at it, right? So I go out and buy Know Before or Breach Secure Now or name your product of the month, because this seems to be the thing that, like, there's a new flavor of anti-social engineering or dark web monitoring or whatever every other week. And obviously the MSP has to provide something. So they get stuck in this, like, do I go buy this product and deliver it to the customer and hope that they'll use it? Or what's the right answer for them in that situation?
It's more than product
Right.
is the deal. Lawyers are smart and they're crafty. And so a lot of times the words in contracts, we're talked about cyber risk, but put it into customer contracts, data processing addendums, they're crafty. And so they use words like due care, due diligence, okay? Due care and due diligence in the context of contracts and in the legal world, that's more than having a policy that was downloaded and defined and replaced on the name. That's more than a product. When they go through these types of when bad things happen, and if a claim needs to be satisfied, or you're going towards any certification, you need to prove that the policies exist, they've been ratified, and some sort of evidence or artifacts that can show logs, screenshots, other things that these have been implemented, they've been put in use, they're in practice, and can be evidenced. And I think that when I've looked at these things in the past, you say, well, if I did all that, I wouldn't have had a claim in the first place. And I think that's kind of where they're getting to is it's not just a product, it's not just blinking lights and white noise. It's more than that. It's procedures and practices and being able to demonstrate that. And that's where compliance, and I think what you're going to see, and we've seen a lot of it, especially with CMMC. I mean, you're hearing so much. I mean, there's probably 50 webinars a day on CMMC and manufacturing firms and what to do around that. And that's another great example of cascading compliance demands that are hidden. If they're not already, you're going to start seeing them more and more, either requirements for the MSP to meet certain attestations or certifications, or the clients. And no longer are the days where you can pass off your data centers SOC 2 Type 2 or download Microsoft's Trust Center documents and things and get by. They want to know. Alex used the term Wild West. You used to be able to get away with that. Now there's just so much data and so many people out there saying, hey, if you're vulnerable, then so am I. And this due care, due diligence that goes above and beyond product. It's being able to demonstrate that there's a policy to support it, leadership within the organization supports the policy, and they're willing to invest some sort of dollars and resources into being able to evidence the fact that these things are in place and working as designed.
Right.
That's what compliance does.
Pivoting back to the original question or first bullet point of the segmentation between the MSP, the MSSP, the security consultant, the third-party auditor. And, as I was contemplating that bullet point, going into this discussion today, and on another call with Huntress, they showed me this diagram right here, just to exemplify. And it just goes to what Brian was saying about white noise and blinking lights. I mean, this is the landscape of cybersecurity. And that's not so much the service provider landscape. This is just the vendors that are trying to position different products into this mix. And our clients, and ourselves to a certain degree, are simply confused and just can't make sense of all of these moving pieces, and to be able to then take these and turn them into an evidenceable implementation. We've covered this control with this piece of software, this piece of hardware, etc., and we can prove it from start to finish, from policy to control to standard to evidence and artifacts, is really where that last challenge of being able to prove that you've implemented these things, not just claim that you've implemented.
So let's talk about that and what that looks like, because as MSPs, we go out to Chartech or to ConnectWise or to wherever we get our training and education from, and they tell us, and speaking of things that there's 50 workshops or 50 webinars a day on packaging and pricing your MSP services, right? And they told me I should be able to go sell my MSP services for $150 a seat and I can make money at it, blah, blah, blah. And in comes compliance. And I've sold this product. I've got a customer on a 3-year deal. They're supposed to be my customer for the next 3 years, and I'm going to do all their technology stuff. And I didn't plan on having to have a VCIO to do all of this stuff. And I think way too often we use the phrase, the term, the title VCIO way too loosely. How does an MSP get from where the customer just expects that we have all these things covered to where we can actually go out and, instead of because in the early days it was just buy a backup product, deploy a backup product, monitor a backup product, you're good. How do you get from there to compliance with your customer without them feeling like we did a bait and switch on them, where we said we'd tackle all their technology for $150 a seat, and now we're coming in with this thing where that's not the case anymore?
Yeah, when you look, oftentimes customers need educated, right? They need their hand held a bit to say, okay, we have some of these IT controls and things in place. And you mentioned a lot of product. And so what we see a lot of when we go into a customer that's never had compliance, but they have a good MSP in place. Think of this in the NIST world. Everybody probably on the call understands NIST CSF, right? And so you have that circle. And so when we go in, and oftentimes we've got a client that's being pressured by their customer to be 800-171 or SOC 2 Type 2, they're getting pressure from their customer to do that. And so we come in and they're like, well, we have this MSP. And I say, that's great, but let's look at some of the controls. And if you think back to the NIST CSF, that round circle, when we see a good, strong MSP partnership in there with the customer, the identify and protect, the right-hand side of that circle's prevention, controls are pretty well met. I mean, most MSPs do a pretty good job at the prevention part of it, right? The identify, protect.
Mm-hmm.
And even a little bit, the MSSPs come into the detect, or if you have a SOC as a service, Arctic Wolf or somebody like that, then you're doing some of that. But then the identify, protect, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. So the respond, recover, you start to get away from technology a little bit. Those are very people-centric controls, very process-driven things. And so oftentimes what we see is the gaps. So there's pressure on the MSP to say, hey, I'm the customer, I'm going to you. And I say, I've got to be SOC 2 Type 2 compliant, or I've got these 800-171 controls. There's going to be this gap. And that's where the customer is like, well, let's take SOC 2, for example. There's a huge amount of that is around people, processes, HR controls, some accounting controls, some other things that as an MSP, you get involved a little bit. For example, onboarding processes. How confident are you that you have a process? I'll open this up as a question, as an example. How confident are you when I pretend I'm your customer and I just hired an employee, name is John Doe. How and when do you often get the notification that there's going to be a new user onboarding? When do you usually get the request? When the person starts?
I saw the Facebook thread last week. It's 3 hours ahead of time on a Friday, and the user starts Monday.
Yeah.
There was an entire thread on that on Facebook last week. Right?
You get 2 days notice?
No. Well, 2 weekend days. Yeah.
Days? 2 calendar days?
Yeah, 2 calendar days. They were sending this guy nasty grams on Sunday night because because he hadn't answered their email yet, and he says, I get 8 hours. I get 8 business hours. I'll get to you when I get to you. And I'm like, okay, well, you probably don't have a customer anymore. But
most of our clients are at about 2 weeks now.
Yep.
Nice.
Yeah,
not always, but most of the time.
Yeah, we have onboard, offboard forms for all of our major clients, and they fill them out. And I say it's also for security reasons, so that way we make sure that the proper permissions are assigned. If there is a mistake, at least we can trace it back to who made the mistake. And we also have spare laptops that are set up that if, God forbid, they do have an emergency hire or they've got somebody that goes down, they are not lost in productivity and can just boot it up for us. But we require
everybody has a show off in their environment. Thank you, Kirk. Don't worry, does everybody have it together that well? I didn't have it together that well at my MSP. Like we were better than average, but we didn't have spare laptops ready to rock and roll at all of our customers for when they
never mind.
That's one of our assessment questions.
Yes, it was ours too. It was read a lot.
Yeah, my observation is that Kirk is an exception to the rule. Oftentimes, those types of things. Just the MSP, sometimes the last person to know. Also terminations too. There's so many times we go in and we pull, as part of compliance, something that we do. We're not the actual audit firm, because the audit firm actually has to do the attestations and things. What we do is we help the customers build all this evidence. So we can't build all these things and develop the formal information security plan and then test it. That'd be like grading our own homework. So we can't do that. But oftentimes we'll pull a terminated user list, right? Or we can see, hey, how many accounts are out there that haven't logged in the last 30 days, right? That could be a revealing thing to say, well, what's wrong with the termination procedures? Why isn't the MSP doing this? Well, the MSP didn't know about it. So there's a number of different procedures. We've talked about social engineering real quick. We do social engineering penetration tests as part of our normal pen testing. And we love to pick on the MSP, right? I used to have 20 years, I had several of them. I kind of know the nooks and crannies. And so this was a mid-market company, quasi-insurance company. We were doing a social engineering penetration test. Black box, we found one of their help desk people on LinkedIn. We domain squatted, so they have a alliteration. They have 2 T's in their name. So we bought a domain. We dropped a T from their name, so quick glance would look like it. So we domain squatted. So for $15, we had a domain, we had an email address, we scraped a picture off of LinkedIn, and we sent an email. We just on the web, we're able to figure out their email, the way they format their email addresses. Send an email into the HR director. And we said, we're impersonating their IT support, because we found that just through their board member is also, their CEO was a board member of this MSP, did some other searching, found all this out. So within an hour, we're emailing the director of HR at this company with a quick email to say, hey, Scott was the guy. So, hey, this is Scott. As you know, we're working on a couple of projects and we need to run an update on your computer real quick. Can we get remote access? Okay. Within a couple minutes, she emails back and she says, you know what, I'm going into a meeting. Can you do it now? We're like, yeah, sure. So within an hour and a half, we're sitting on, and we took screenshots and other things. We're sitting on the director of HR's computer, their machine, without them even there, went to a meeting. So we're sitting there unattended with all the rights and privileges, the HR person. So again, those are some of the things that are missing sometimes when you're talking about procedures, and it might just be privilege changes, onboarding, terminations. IT glue is excellent, to kind of work back and forth to get sticky. That's one product. We're vendor neutral. We don't sell any services or hardware or anything, but there's things that we've worked with over the years and like. But the idea there is how do you get procedurally sticky? And let me tell you, compliance, or having someone like a Cosant, doesn't have to be us, but someone like us that speaks the language of compliance, can help pull out the compliance card sometimes and get some of these things that you've been probably harping on them. I heard MFA earlier, but harping on them for a while to do just because it's good pragmatic security. But sometimes it's good to have that kind of security look, not a product or a security solution type of assessment, but more of a, let's take a deep dive into some of the processes and procedures and practices, and what's the compliance and regulatory landscape look like for a customer. And we put together a roadmap, but that's heavily involving the MSP and working with the MSP to make sure that we're connecting to some of the value you're already providing them. I mean, we see this a lot where it's like, we're going through and it's like, oh, you knew your MSP's taking care of this whole section of controls for you, and so we're kind of reinforcing the value there. But there's other things that oftentimes, whether it's IDS, IPS, SOC, a SIM, being able to sell some of these additional services that a neutral third party can come in, especially that has the security credentials and expertise specific in information security, and some of those designations come in and say, you know what, these are important. I connected them to the policies, and this is another great sales tactic. But when we're working with customers to build the policies, especially their leadership team, policies are one of those things the leadership team says, this is the way we want it. Based on our risk appetite, our risk tolerance for risk, this is what we want to happen. And you say, great, this is what you want to happen. Well, we need to work with the MSP because there's a whole bunch of controls missing. There's a whole bunch of things that an MSP and an MSSP needs to provide to get these things accomplished, to make these policies happen. They do that, the MSP quotes them, and then they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We can't afford that. Fine, then we need to go back and change the policy. You said this policy was important because it matched your tolerance for risk. So if we need to go back and change that, we can. But if you hold true to the policy work that we did, this is the practice, this is the tools, this is what the MSP needs to put in place to satisfy this policy that you said was important.
And Brian, I want to bridge a minute. One of the things that you said was one of the things that Alex brought up, which is, the pricing pressure as you're adding, more aspects of the security monitoring and the compliance to what you're already doing, and you're trying to make sure that your clients are safe, but you're also constrained by your price per seat attached to that. In combination with what you said, Brian, which is that in that NIST framework, we often miss the respond and recover piece, which are more people intensive and more policy and process and systematic. Those kind of fit together in what you were just talking about, which is as you start talking about the minimum tolerable downtime, for example, in a risk management plan, which has direct implications for the MSP and what the response time and how those types of things are going to come together. That is a business discussion. That's a business operation discussion about what the return on investment is, why we're investing in these certain areas to accomplish these certain things. And it has nothing to do with the product.
Yeah, it's the why.
The product and service solves the business problem, but it creates an ROI path that's driven by a business requirement that you can tie your product or service, your seat price to, which changes the context of that price per seat conversation.
So speaking as an MSP, as a former MSP owner, we had this flat cost that we went in and did support for. We worried about who we introduced our clients to, right? Because every time we turn around, Dell or HP is trying to sell them something, or the copier company all of a sudden now is a managed service provider and they're trying to sell them something. A company like Cosant that has all the badges, right? We have all the fancy titles and names and trainings and experience. There's nothing stopping a company like Cosant from becoming a managed service provider tomorrow. What is it that they can go look for in a partner to come help them with this compliance piece, that they make sure they're not just letting the wolf into the hen house? Because that's, I don't know about the rest of you guys on this call, but as an MSP, that was always a concern to me. I introduced a copier company to my largest client. They worked great with us for 5 years, and then they decided they were an MSP overnight, and they went to my largest client and said, hey, how about you let us do this support work for you? And my client luckily was very loyal and emailed me and said, hey, I remember 5 years ago when you introduced me to these people, and I think you should know what they did to you, right? But not all clients would say that. Not all clients would do that. So there's always that piece. And am I the only one in the room that thinks like that, or do you guys have some concern about that with bringing somebody else in to talk compliance and all these other things with your
Alex, before everybody else weighs in, which we'll open it up, but one other thing, the elephant in the room that I like to throw out there as well, a reluctance with companies like us as a third-party gap assessment tool is, we start off looking at, what is the security posture right now, and identify where there's gaps or remediations that should be done. And so there can be that initial response of, oh my God, they're going to point out all the things that are gaps, and I'm going to look bad. So before we address the response to that, let's just throw that into the mix as well of a third party coming in to expose gaps.
I assume those are all realistic concerns for everybody on the call. So Brian, do you want to talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I know because we've worked with a lot of MSPs across the nation, right? I've spoke at some of the ConnectWise stuff and work with a lot of them, and I think that there has to be trust and some disarming done a little bit. I mean, I vowed personally once I sold the MSP in 2017 to never monitor, manage, maintain another network as long as I live, right? I never wanted to do that ever again. And so a lot of the conversation I have is especially for MSPs that bring me in, is I look for ways to to highlight the successes and sell the value. And really what I do is anything that is a red flag or is a question or a concern, I go to the MSP directly and we talk about it. There's usually a reason why. There's always a reason why something is done. And so I think when you look for a partner to help do this stuff, I think it comes down to trust and also the fact that we don't have anything to sell. There's no end game. There's a lot of people in this cybersecurity which is used freely, and the cybersecurity industry in general is a bunch of hoodie wearing hacking pictures and ones and zeros flying around, and it's silly, right? It's this Hollywood version of hacker. That's not the bad guys. But I think it's knowing that I've established trust. I have the best interest in both the MSP and the client, and we're not a hammer looking for a nail. We're not coming in to do this assessment and then all roads lead to some black box we sell and then we get to displace you as the MSP. The value is in the relationship and the partnership and and in building trust and at the same time improving your customers' security posture. I mean, doing some pragmatic things. Sometimes it has to be done in the name of compliance. That's the only thing that gets some customers' attention. Sometimes the only thing that gets a customer's attention is their inability to sell, right? If they get pressure to say, I can't sell Joe XYZ anymore until I get this SOC 2 Type 2 or till I'm CMMC or till I'm something. Oftentimes they're not ready to do anything, even in the name of improving their security. I mean, we've even talked to companies that have been breached and ransomwared, and they're still not ready to do anything except the bare minimum to keep going. And it's like, well, what's it going to take? And they get close calls and other things, and oftentimes it's not until the compliance card or some of these their customer demands come into play are they ready to do something. And I think Alex and Mark, I think there's very few looking around that's in this information security or cybersecurity space that isn't product driven. We're coming in and we're building process policies and procedures to help the MSP and to strengthen what the MSP is already doing, and maybe services and solutions the MSP has historically ran into roadblocks for all the reasons I mentioned in being able to sell or justify as an add-on or a bolt-on to some of the stuff that you're already doing. So I think in a lot of ways we can help remove friction where there's been friction in some of that sales process before. Not only friction for the MSP, but your customers and what they're, we talk about using information security and compliance as a differentiator sometimes, and what that means is to say, hey, for example, we just helped an MSP here in the Phoenix, Arizona area over the last 5 months get SOC 2 Type 2 compliant. So we did all the heavy lifting, all of the evidence building and policies and procedures, continuity of operation. We did their tabletop life cycles of evidence for them in a 4 or 5 month period to get them to SOC 2 Type 2. Now they can expand what they're doing to some customers that they haven't been able to get into before. They also had some contingencies from some larger customers, contingencies that said, hey, by this date, we need you to get SOC 2 Type 2 compliant because you're in our critical path and our bouncing ball of the data flow diagram. We need you to do this to make our life easier. So
And
in some ways,
folks are going to see more and more of that with CMMC coming down the road, right?
cascading compliance demands. Yeah, if you look at 800-171 and a variety of those controls, there's shared responsibilities. There's a number of controls that they're relying on you for, and especially privileged accounts and some other things, access control. You know, I see that the CMMC over the next few years increasingly going into the you know, the MSP requirement.
And the vendor management programs, vendor risk management programs are basically at the top of everybody's thought process right now, because they're watching the biggest cybersecurity incident that we've seen in decades play out on our supply chain.
Who's helping your clients do vendor risk management? Are any of you guys today helping your clients with vendor risk management? Rafi,
MSSP, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
So-
we have actually they just got acquired, but they're a client that was a software vendor that was supplying systems and engineering to large banks, Bloomberg, things like that.
Wow.
And so those companies would come in to do a third-party risk assessment. We would facilitate that, either the way that they, usually the way they want it, which most of the time it was spreadsheets, but then we're more and more seeing companies use things like CyberGRX or Wistic or some other middleware to help manage that process. But it's a pain in the ass.
Manage that data. That's interesting. Cool. So Brian, is that an in for some of these guys to get somebody like you at the table to start with vendor risk management and doing some of those processes? Or what's the right way for them to get their client to open the door and let one more person come sit at the big table and have the conversation?
I think it's really just having those one-on-one discussions and learning how each customer is a little different with what's the trigger, what is their regulatory compliance landscape. So I think it just starts with kind of a brief conversation. Not going to be the right fit for everybody, but I think it's asking the right questions and understanding what the customer demands, and then being able to help educate the customer. I mean, that's one of my favorite things that I get to do on a daily basis, talk to folks and wake them up a little bit to, what's coming and what's in front of them. And when you talk about vendor risk, works both ways. And I can kind of see that there's a world where, these because we put in vendor risk management programs, but it's like, well, who's going to do it longer term? We're not in the picture forever and ever. And so somebody's got to be part of that process, just like onboarding, termination. If they're going to onboard, if your customers are going to onboard a new vendor, how is that evaluated? That could ultimately be something that is done within the MSP space. It's just part of that, and you're already getting it on the other end. You're getting the.
They don't evaluate it. They just call me on Monday morning and say, "Last week we bought this. Please deploy it." Yeah. At least that's how it worked for me. I don't know about you guys, but.
Well, and to one of the questions that you asked just now, Alex, it's. Sometimes it's simply a matter of observing. I mean, you can always ask them the questions about their compliance environment and certain trigger events that might be, but it's also just observing. If they are sending you security questionnaires for you to fill out on their behalf, that's a signal or a sign of the compliance requirements cascading from one of their clients.
Right.
And I was just thinking for Brian and I there's probably between 3 and 6 of our clients that we get, because of the largest social media networks and on both the business side and the personal side, that we don't have anything to do with directly, but the customers or clients that are servicing, the Facebooks and LinkedIns and Twitters of the world are now getting compliance requirements if they want to maintain that relationship. And then they have no choice. They just have to step up and get SOC 2 qualified.
But this is also coming for all those folks that have to be or who are doing work for like a municipality or and any sort of a government institution. Anybody who touches Department of Defense, like this is rolling downhill for everybody. We see that we see the writing on the wall for that. We see Louisiana taking the first steps and doing some of their own stuff at the state level. Presumably, many more will follow. William, it'll probably be you Californians first.
And they'll either do it themselves or they'll just piggyback on top of CMMC. And in particular, with the incident that we've just seen, which CMMC originates in the Department of Defense, but with the breadth and impact across the federal government, I would say that CMMC spreading in the federal government is going to accelerate.
So one of the really common questions we get at Lifecycle is, can I use your tool to do CMMC or NIST 800-171 or whatever? And the answer that we've given arguably may not have always been the best answer, but we've uploaded or helped folks create templates to do some of those things in our platform. I know, Brian, you and I have kind of talked about this, and you have a unique opinion, or I don't know that it's a unique opinion, but it was unique to me at the time, opinion of what our part really plays in helping somebody prep for that. But do you want to talk a little bit about that?
In terms of GRC, Alex?
Well, yeah, and kind of with the difference between where a GRC kind of picks up and some of the issues with trying to square peg a round hole into using a smaller platform like ours in place of a GRC.
Yeah, is everybody familiar what a GRC tool is or does? Most people?
I see a lot of blank stares, so why don't you start there?
Yeah, so governance, risk, and compliance, that's what GRC is. So governance, risk, and compliance platforms are very specific to saying, I'm going to load a certificate, a standard. Let's put SOC 2 Type 2 in there. It loads it up with all the AI CPA controls. Okay, so it's got all the control requirements in it. So you log in, you get to those control requirements, and it has a way to put in a control description. In other words, how am I satisfying this control? So you type that in. And then you can also upload evidence and artifacts that support that, or evidence that control is actually in place and working. So you go through each control. There's 460 or so in SOC 2, for example. You go through each one, 800, 171, 110 plus controls. You go through each one, and it's kind of cool in that you can build workflows. So there's some of that stuff that in a GRC tool, you'd set up a workflow for a specific control that, hey, a customer is going to provide this. And the MSP provides the network diagram. And then you link those specific things to where they go within the GRC tool. And so pretty robust set is, it has to be a very secure repository because you're uploading some very sensitive and proprietary and confidential information, customer information. In some cases, it might be screenshots of access control lists and things like that. So it's a secure repository. It's all the evidence is linked, gives you workflows, reporting capabilities, status indicators for each of the different controls, allows an audit firm to come in and green light or satisfy each one of those controls. So it does a variety of things from workflows to repository to linking and reporting, Alex. So quite a bit of breadth of controls that you could work in and build those workflows around.
So we kind of briefly talked just about using a tool like Lifecycle to set the stage for the audit, to go through and prove that quarterly you're checking on a certain number of things, that you're actually running, risk assessment throughout the year and doing some of those other things. Can some of that become the evidence that these folks are using come audit time?
Yeah, sure. I think that it depends on the audit, depends on the certification, but the idea here, the big idea here with the GRC or getting anything into like what Alex is talking about is that you get away from spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are the devil. I think Google's the devil. I think spreadsheets are the devil. If you've seen a lot of the questionnaires or when people do compliance, you're seeing this emailing of all things of spreadsheets back and forth and people emailing back and forth the evidence requirements and things, You just let's get away from the email component. Let's get away from spreadsheets. And anytime you can systematize and put a process behind it, you're light years ahead of your competition. For sure. And that's the spirit of a GRC or any assessment tool. They're not all created equal, as Alex can attest to, but having some sort of way to handle it that's outside of email and spreadsheets, again, a huge gain above what your competition is doing.
Maybe a slightly different perspective on it. We had a conversation with a prospect earlier this week, and they're very, very good at CMMC, but much better than most of the companies that we talk to. Usually they start off with very little, but this company's got their internal IT. They've implemented most, if not all, of the CMMC controls already. And at the end of the discussion, we were talking about GRC tools, which is why I bring it into context here. The gap that we identified with them is not so much the implementation and the controls and security posture for CMMC. They may have a few open ends on that front. The gap that they have is the compliance end. They can't prove it. They've implemented all these things. They've got all this stuff in play, and it's actually operationalized, which is very cool. They're in a pretty good security position. But when it comes to a third-party auditor, they're going to say, okay, let's start with the policy. Where's your policy? And they're going to map it forward to backwards. And if you can't map it, you can't get compliant.
That's what we spend a lot of time doing when there's an MSP involved. The protections are there. They just can't get credit for it in the compliance world. So a lot of our work is building the information security, the formal written information security program with the right policies, procedures connected to things that they're already doing, because that's the life cycle of evidence. Policies, procedures, just policies with control objectives, standards, and guidelines, procedures that support those controls, right? Controls that support the policies, they're the procedures, the practices. Being able to actually do that, that's a lot of what you guys do. And then provide the evidence. That's that full life cycle of evidence that satisfies, that puts smiles on an auditor's face, green lights. Yeah.
That kind of leads right to where I wanted to wrap up at, and we're about at the end of our time. So I'd like to have you answer one more question, and then we'll kind of open up and let everybody pick at you and poke at you and see what they can uncover for personal opportunities. But one of the things that we talked about was kind of using cybersecurity to really become stickier with our clients, and using this as a real opportunity to cement in our relationships, as opposed to that thing that we're afraid to do because it opens the door and lets in the wolf. So just talk quickly about your opinion on how we get to use this to kind of make a sticky client, right? You talked through kind of what we get to do and show how they're operationalizing and really documenting and road mapping all of our processes. But you got anything else?
Yeah, to mature, to get to a good due diligence state. When we build our information security programs, there's 82 procedures that link in the MSP. 82. Wow. 82 procedures. Some have already been accomplished. It varies from client and MSP engagements. We have 82 different procedures alone that sounds overwhelming, but some of these procedures are pretty small. So but I mean, at the same time, that loop in the MSP and get the MSP stickier, a lot more involved with the customer's business, not just their IT, but much more strategic, more closely aligned than they ever have been before. We have a number of different references in the MSP space that once we've come in, we're obviously helping the client mature their security program, but now we're integrating all of these procedures, and we picked on the onboarding one because that's an easy one, but that's an example of tighter coordination and tighter alignment between the MSP and their customer. And I think the more you're integrated and ingrained in their culture and the way they do business, and you just become part of their process and another line item on their budget, I think that at that point in time, you've established yourself as less of a commodity and more of an integral partner in how this customer does business. The idea here is the customer at the end of the year, you know, they look at what they spent and they say, I can't imagine running my business without Kirk and his team. I don't know how I would run my business without Kirk.
Because they're so finely ingrained in that day-to-day process, right?
Yeah.
Damn right, Kirk. Damn
Yeah.
right. But, you know, I think this speaks to, you know, all of us have heard the question or have asked the question, you know, what do I do to get my customers to the table? And I think some of this is that stuff that you can do that is above the, that moves you up the value stack, right? We always see that value pyramid. That's the commodity stuff at the bottom. That's, you know, okay, we can install antivirus, we can replace parts, we can do these things. Then we get a little more strategic, and we can talk about replacement life cycles of equipment, and, you know, running some basic summary risk assessments for our clients. But then opening up further to really bring in the folks who and have a relationship with the folks who are showing them how policy and procedure and compliance and regulation, it can be managed throughout the whole company. Really brings you to the seat as the MSP, brings you a seat at the table when they're talking about how the whole company works. And when we really get a seat at the table as a C-level executive, or at the C-level executive table, like, that's reaching the top of that value pyramid, of that value stack. And that's what I like about how you talk about it.
I'll add maybe a slightly different perspective than Brian advanced, which is that, you know, the security, because it's very hot, people are worried about it. They see it in the news. They're concerned about it. From the MSP, and this applies to the insurance that we were talking about before, cyber insurance, because, you know, the companies are basically doing the same thing. They're looking at it as both an offensive and a defensive perspective from as it relates to sales. You know, on the offensive perspective is, I'm going to use the security discussion to engage a new prospect who's probably already doing business with another MSP. And once I, you know, have some type of a dialogue on that security front, I'm going to try to bridge that into dislodging the existing competitor.
Right.
And then on the defensive side, it's the exact opposite, which is, you know, I'm going to prevent that security conversation from coming from an outside source because I'm doing it myself, to defend against somebody coming in and trying to use that. And it's a perfect parallel because they're doing the exact same thing in insurance. They're using cyber insurance as the horse to get the conversation going, and then they dislodge the rest of the insurance.
Yep. So Marnie's going to throw something up on the screen here. This is the contact info for Brian and Mark. If you guys want to reach out, if you guys want to have further conversation, we're kind of coming up on our time today and we want to be respectful of it. But if you guys have questions for them, I'd like to open it up and let you guys kind of pick their brains while we got them stuck at the table here. Anybody got questions for Mark and Brian? You guys are such a lively group today.
I just feel like it's a radio show, Mark and Brian.
Yeah.
Brian in the morning.
Huh?
Yeah, sorry.
I grew up with Mark and Brian in Los Angeles too.
I mean, yeah, just totally off the topic there. I apologize. How do you guys, like, where do you guys, it seems like you do a lot more than like the compliancy group, because they seem very focused on only HIPAA. I guess where do you guys compare? Or is it just that you do everything else that they don't do? Or
To the HIPAA group? I don't know.
sorry, it's called compliancy group. I wasn't sure if you guys were kind of in the same space, or never mind.
No,
You don't know who they are, then never mind. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Right.
often, what's that?
I said, from what I read about you, it doesn't look like.
Mhm.
Yeah, what makes us different from like an audit firms, we don't have the independence thing, so we're building all the evidence, doing again all that heavy lifting that an audit team can't do. An audit team is good at saying, okay, we looked, here's all your gaps, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, and Mr. or Mrs. Customer is like, okay, we don't know what to do with this. We'll call our MSP, and MSP looks at it and said, well, we'll do this, this, and this, and then there's all these other things that the client doesn't have the experience or bandwidth or expertise to do, and that's the gap we fill.
I think compliancy group kind of fits in where Breach Secure Now or HIPAA Secure Now and some of those guys do, where it's a platform.
I know BSN. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think they're like the HIPAA side of BSN, where it's, here's our platform, and meet with us once a year and we'll help you draft a policy or a procedure or something. But I hear quite often that those are just not enough where it comes to really.
Well, there's nobody leading the charge. And so what happens is, again, it gets down to, okay, I've got the policies and I printed them off and we filed them under interesting, but they never really get ratified or done, or that's where the vCISO services can really help too, is to help provide that leadership, with where the policies and procedures actually get put in place and can be actually evidenced and not just words on a page.
Okay.
So,
oh, go ahead, William.
I think I was going to say the same thing you are, which was Lance inquired about what pricing looks like. I think the answer is probably it's different in every case because every case is different. But
well, I say the same things you guys do. Is it depends, right? It depends on scope.
My favorite answer.
Yeah, it's my answer to everything. But I can tell you, typically, we're not for everybody. We're not going to be for all of your clients, right? There's going to be maybe the top 5 or 10% of your clients where they're going to resonate with this. They're going to see this type of things. They've got enough meat on the bone where they're going to see the value in this. And for those customers, oftentimes we're starting with 0 or very low maturity, and we're oftentimes it's a 6-month kind of deal, and depending on the gap, I mean it can be, it's been as little as around $5,000 and go up to 6 figures after that, depending upon what their roadmap is. We're doing one now that's a $500,000 of compliance engagement. They're only a $50 million company, but we're doing about a $500,000 worth of work. We just took, for the quick case study, their existing MSP, we just took them from about $3,500 a month. They're doing $15,000 a month, their MSP now, just because of all of the controls and everything that they have to do to satisfy those controls.
Is that new products and services that they had to deploy, or
that's all net new stuff? Yeah, wow. That's all net new stuff. There was environments that this customer had that the MSP didn't even really know about. They'd never been involved in it. The customer facing stuff that this particular end client has. So that's just a quick case study, but I mean it can just vary widely based on the certifications and designations and the starting point.
Well, and a good example of that is that company that I brought up that is very operationally mature with CMMC, but doesn't have the compliance, is a whole totally different scope than a company that comes to us and says, we haven't really done anything other than what our MSP has done as the baseline, and we need to be CMMC compliant in 3 months or 6 months. As to, that's why it depends.
Perfect.
Anybody else? Feel free to take yourself off mute and join the conversation.
I have a question. So, like you were saying, it's not like a one and done type thing. So how do you guys move like an MSP to mature in some of those areas? Because I know, it's going to be a lot of work to keep going and new regulations and new things. How do you guys kind of work in those areas?
Yeah, Mark, are you talking specifically for the MSP?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Now the MSPs we've worked with vary widely too. The last one, the one that we just got to the finish line at the end of last month, we had a lot of document building. So we do that initial heavy lifting, but we built everything for them in IT glue. So we put all of the information security policies. Actually, we put their policies in SharePoint because policies are a single source of truth. They live forever or live for a very long time. They're reviewed annually. But we put all the procedures that support them in IT glue and linked them to the policies. We linked them to some of the ancillary plans. We had to build their incident response plan. We did the tabletop test on all that, the continuity of operations. So we built some of the DR playbooks for them. So a lot of documentation, a lot of exercising, connecting to some of the stuff they were already doing. That took 5 months with this particular MSP. We can't do them any faster than 3 months, but then longer term, after we've built it, MSPs are a little bit different cat, right? So you once the information security procedures are built, this particular one was for SOC 2, for example, we're involved very little in the next SOC 2 audit cycle. Most of the time with MSPs, it's a heavy lift to get to the first one. And then we're just helping with some continuous monitoring on some of the policies, ad hoc kind of stuff where they call, say, Brian, we had this come up, or we're doing this, quick question kind of things. But after that initial, with MSPs, after the initial heavy lifting is done, there's, to be honest, there's not a lot of involvement for us after that. If we've done our job right, we've in some cases taught them to fish, so to speak.
Does some of that carry down to the client level? Like once you've worked with the MSP through their first 1 or 2 or 3 clients, are they able to do more and more of this on their own? Or, I mean, I'm sure there's always the requirement to bring somebody in who's outside of the day-to-day operations, so that, you know, to make sure that you have someone monitoring that's not.
Yeah, it depends on the size of the client and the compliance. So there's a lot of these compliance where they have to have governance. So there's an independent CISO that's helping with the oversight and governance, who's actually working between the client and the auditor, kind of that internal audit function that has to be separate from IT. But that's not every client, and in most cases, especially the smaller customers, the MSP has enough to do a lot of this without a continuous need on a partner like us.
Awesome. Anybody else?
So just a quick question. When we've done, I'm just going back to the vendor third-party risk analysis stuff, when we've had to deal with that, the policies, no problem. Procedures, not a big deal. It would end up being collecting the evidence that these things were being done. That was the most difficult part. What has been your process around that, or am I getting too much into your secret sauce?
Oh no, there's no secret sauce. There's no way to make it sexy either. Gathering evidence, harvesting evidence, it's screenshots, it's logs, it's emails. There's no secret sauce. And if anybody says that they have some sort of push a button and I've got compliance as a service and I'm done, the best you can do is leveraging a GRC tool. You can get everything on a rhythm to know, hey, every third quarter I have a cadence, and these are the things I need to do to get compliance on a rhythm. So it's not the CF around that last 30 days when the auditors are coming or something. It's where you establish a cadence, a rhythm, and you're uploading things based on workflows. Hey, I'm going to set up a workflow on a governance, risk, and compliance platform to ping you when you need to update this year's network diagram and upload it, and then it gets linked.
I think those things that are on cadence are that makes total sense. I think where it becomes a problem is when every company has their own list of questions and evidentiary requirements that's different from one to another. I'm hoping that these third-party companies, as they get together and kind of formalize and stuff, that will slowly go away, but
it'll never happen, in my opinion. Yeah, everybody has their own flavor, and we've even said, hey, as a policy, we don't fill out questionnaires, but here, take our SOC 2, or take our ISO cert, and that's just not the reality. But I tell you what works well is we do this with customers that get a lot of questionnaires. We fill out, if they're in education, we'll fill out a HECVAT, but usually we'll take the SIG full, which is brutal. But you take the SIG full and you fill it out, and then you take, after you have the information security program built, policies, procedures, and other things, you harvest screenshots and build a PowerPoint out of that. That becomes your evidence. You never want to share your policies and your procedures. You never want to share those directly, but you give that evidence in tandem with the SIG full filled out for whatever that product or service is that the vendor risk assessment is done around. Cool. But that's the closest you can get to getting that thing on a rhythm and getting things pre-filled. But those Archer and those customized questionnaires are just going to be a fact of life for a long time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I wish they would standardize. I just did a post. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I just did a post about what a pain in the butt security questionnaires are, and so anyway.
Brian's always got some good content on LinkedIn. Go find him out there. Go stalk him out there and follow him. So with that, I think we're going to take this as our opportunity to wrap. Just a quick housekeeping note. We have you guys on the schedule to do these pretty much every Friday, but we are going to be taking little holiday, so there will not be a Friday workshop this Friday or next Friday. So we hope everybody has a good Christmas.
No Christmas and New Year's Day, huh?
Hanukkah's over, so I hope you had a good Hanukkah. Whatever else it is you may celebrate, happy that. And we look forward to seeing everybody back beginning of next year. But I want to say thanks to Brian and Mark. Marnie, do you want to throw their contact info up one last time for anybody who didn't grab it? And
hey,
Brian, you got any
Alex,
parting words for us?
Hey, Alex, thank you very much for the invitation. Great seeing everybody on the call today. And I just, no question is out of bounds. Nothing off limits. If you have a question, a concern, something pops in your mind, customer question, a question of your own, nothing's off limits. Just reach out. This is my passion. I love doing this stuff and I'd love to help. So reach out. You have a friend in the business.
I would elaborate on that to say, our goal is to build trust and build awareness with all of you guys. And so as part of that, not just questions now, but keep this information on file. And if something comes up with one of your clients or something comes up with something in your world, just email us whenever. The more we have an interaction with you, the more we're making progress to building the relationships that are mutually beneficial. And that's all we're after.
And with that, it is 4:12 and almost 5 o'clock somewhere. So.
Oh goodness! For those of us that started with
the West Coast is like, it's only 1 o'clock. I need to go home.
We're in Arizona. It's 2.
So many more hours. Oh shoot!
All right.
You're out in Brian's country. You guys aren't very far apart. So.
Yeah, right on, right on.
Yep.
All right.
Cool.
All right, guys.
Thanks,
thanks, Marty. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Yeah,
All right,
thanks
take
for
care.
coming.
All right, bye-bye.
Good
Thank
one.
you.